So in this situation, I have kept the water pretty much between a drip and also deep watering. I like to keep it this way so it really thrives. And I water locally. I make sure that the root around the drip zone is covered and not the area outside. Now, the disadvantage is if you water the entire flower bed or the raised bed area, I don't have raised bed area, but anyway, if you start to water the entire thing, the advantage is you are able to bring more earthworms into the area. And in my situation, I'm taking the water conservation method, and I do have plenty of worms, so I'm not worried about that. So that's the drawback. I save some water, but I don't get as many worms as I potentially could have gotten. So some people say, I have no time. Well, guess what? I have 60 cucumber plants. I have 100 tomato plants. I love all that stuff. So if I have time to hold down a 9 to 5 job, no, actually 8 to 5, you can do it, and with so many plants. Some people would say, oh, I'm so tired. How many plants do you have? Oh, I have 6. Look, if you're able to sit down, have a cup of coffee, you have time to water your 6 plants. No excuse. Treat them well, it'll be rewarded.
And you have to salvage your old man's...
Right, which you'll see. All right, so I have 2 pots. I want you to guess which soil type it is. This was done on the bricks, 2 bricks stacked together with the Corona clipper and it's rock solid.
I have a question.
Yes.
What is the symptom that will be shown on leaves for underwater and overwater? Sometimes I just cannot tell if my fruit tree is underwater or overwater.
There's a common trait. They all turn yellow as they get ready to die, or a leaf get ready to fall off. So what I have noticed is when the trees are overwatered, the edges tend to be kind of yellow, and that's especially true for squash. The edges are kind of yellowish, so you need to hold back then. Citrus, if they are not waxy, it's not shiny, it's a little shriveled up, then it's lack of water. So excessive water, you may have leaves looking really plump, but starting to fade to yellow. But then if it's not enough water, it's green, but shriveled up, and then turn yellow. So the one on the left, it went down for 2 minutes. The water didn't recede, none at all. So I gave up. I had to shut the video off. So take a look. The same amount of water. Of course, the soil receded a bit because of gravity and also moisture. It carried it down. It's okay. When that happens, you just add more soil to it. Besides, certain plants, like tomato, you would plant above the dicot because roots will start to grow from the stem, from the trunk. It's not true for all plants. So I added another, it started to saturate and came out. Now, some of you may water every day on some potted plants. And you say, oh, I watered it and the water came out. Now, I want you to go home and do an A-B experiment. You get a big bucket or tray, actually a bucket, slightly larger than your plant. And then you fill it up with water. Be sure to measure your amount, get a beaker or something, measuring cup. Fill it to a certain level, like a quart, and then you put the entire pot and it's completely submerged into the water bucket. Wait for 5 minutes. So 5 minutes, you'll see bubbles start to come out because the water is going down to displace the air that's inside the soil. It's going to come out. Get it out of the soil, water and prop it up so let the water completely drain into the soil. And measure how much water it's taken. So this process takes about 10 minutes. So there's no more water dripping down into the bucket. The other experiment is you get the same amount of water and you start to water and then you think it's enough. Water is flowing out. So the water flows out, you think, oh, that's enough, it's too much, I'm going to stop. I want you to measure the two, and you realize the completely submerged, full saturation can last for 3 days. I'm talking about this kind of weather, not 100 plus. 100 plus, you need to take a different measure because you need to observe it every day. Just like your kids. Would you say, oh, I forgot to cook for my kids? I don't think so. Now, plants are the same. You need to pay attention to them. You need to see them every morning and every evening. If you don't do that, I don't think it's worth it. It's worth your time to plant them at all. So the A-B experiment, so you can gauge how much water you use. So as you can see here, excessively dry soil, doesn't matter what type. So what do you think the left side is? What kind of soil?
Clay.
Clay? Raise your hand. Guess what? It's sandy soil. It's sandy soil. Now you would think, wait a minute, sand? I went to the beach and I dumped some water and just soaked right through, right? Well, guess what? The sand at the beach has a lot of salt. Salt would break the surface tension of water. So as soon as water hits the salt gets dissolved, creates air pockets, and they carry the water through. But you don't have so much here. So the one on the left is very sandy. It's very fine. I do have it here, so you can come up here and take a look later on. So the one on the left is a result of erosion, improper watering. When you have no time and you try to get things done in a hurry, you start to turn your hose on full blast. Or you have as the law requires, you need to have a nozzle. And the nozzle is not adjusted properly, so it's shooting out like AK-47 at the same spot. Now, for your information, you all heard of bulletproof glass, right? Bulletproof glass is really not bulletproof. When you aim a gun at it, the same spot, 3 shots. The first shot is kind of recessed. When you keep on firing at the same spot repeatedly, it's going to give, it's going to break. So it's a misnomer. So by the same token, over here, if you keep on hosing down the soil at the same spot, it's going to cause some disturbance, loosen things up, and then the finest particle is going to be on top. The heavier one's going to be down the bottom. So the fine particle is going to be on top. Once the water recedes, the fine particles, the sand, the fine powder, is going to fill up all the pores on the soil. So it blocks subsequent watering. And it gets really difficult for water to get through. That's why sometimes you need to get a cultivator, a handheld cultivator, to loosen up the topsoil. So once again, root and air and water can get through easily, because roots can breathe just like us.
Question.
Yes?
What if I have mulch? Because after mulch,
We'll cover mulch in a bit. Mulch is a double-edged sword. It's good and it's bad. And it's bad, it's really bad. I'll show you pictures. So this one here, excessive water force is causing the dirt to bounce up to the bottom side of the leaf. Now, in case you didn't know already, the stomata is on the bottom side of your leaf, and that's where the breathing is taking place. It's like the noses for the trees. So once the fine particles are blocking the leaves, and also water stayed on the bottom, you are likely to get diseases, and they may not breathe properly, and the leaves may turn yellow. So when you need to water small plants, get down on your knees and let the water flow gently onto the soil. So this is what happens. When you hit water jet on the soil, you have erosion and you have soil compaction. And it's causing serious damage. You see the roots exposed? So you think, well, my soil's bad. I'm going to do some digging. That might seem like a good idea, but by doing that, you are cutting the roots into pieces, and water's going through. Of course, when you cut off a root, one segment is going to grow more. But then it's a short-term solution because it's exposed to the air. And that would just go on and on. If you continue that kind of watering method, it's going to cause even more serious damage. So when that happens, what do? You maybe fire up a tiller. You turn the soil. Soil by itself, with nature's elements, rain, snow, we don't have snow here, animals walking by, and the typical irrigation done by us would become more compacted over time. So over time, you want to turn the soil so the top organic materials could be blended with the minerals that's not yet exposed to plants to give it a renewal. And it would give the oxidation that would encourage decay of organic material. So when you do this, there's a drawback. You might be killing earthworms. But hey, if your soil is good enough, they'll generate themselves quickly enough. So I think it's a factor you may want to consider. If you don't feel like killing animals, you may want to seek other methods. But I find this to be very effective. So sifter, go ahead.
How deep do you have to go to the soil for existing plant?
What kind of plants?
Existing, you know.
Okay, existing plants.
Established.
Depends. For carrots, I quite often do it once. I do it 90 degrees, horizontal and vertical. When I'm done with that, I get the soil out and I do another layer. I go deep down for carrots, for root vegetables, for yam. I would do that. Sweet potatoes, I would loosen the soil 2 layers. I would get the soil out and do it again. So by the time I'm done, it's 24 inches, roughly, 2 feet. But usually 1 foot is good enough. Yeah, 1 foot, curiously, is exactly what your shovel is. The shovel is typically 1 foot because that's how far you would dig for most vegetables, but not trees. Trees are deeper.
Question, how often do you do that? You don't want to disturb the ecosystem very often, right? I mean, like you said, earthworm, all that. So, how often?
I do it every season. I do it winter. Winter time, I do it a lot. For example, it's raining. My favorite time is winter time, starting with November. When it rains, don't plow right away because the soil is going to be mud. You wait for about 7 days. So by the way, each inch of water can penetrate about 6 inches of soil if you don't have runoff. So when you have 2 inches of soil, rain that comes down from the sky, you have about 2 inches, 2 feet of, no, let me see, 1 foot of penetration. Let the soil drain down to the bottom evenly distributed before you start to plow. So if the weather's right, I would plow it 7 days after the initial rain, and the soil is really loose and it's easy to do. Once it's done, weeds may start to grow. If it's warm enough, I would plow again, and you would reduce weed by doing that. So I would do that in the winter, sometimes once a week. I fire it up and turn the soil. So as you turn, you may add compost. You can add compost or fertilizer if you wish, Because to me, fertilizer needs to become homogenized with the soil and permeate throughout the entire system, not a concentration near the roots. You need to distribute it evenly for better growth. Because fertilizer in the concentrated form could be harmful to your plants. They could burn your roots. So when I'm preparing, as I explained earlier, fertilizer, I would blend compost and fertilizer, not a full concentration of fertilizer. And this is a really good tool to have. There's a typo there. I was doing this at 3 a.m. So as soon as the seedling is established and the flower buds are ready to emerge, you fertilize. As you can see here, I'm fertilizing with half compost and half fertilizer. And I use a cultivator to scratch it in. It's about an inch and a half. And I tend to do it at an angle, so I'm cultivating the outside soil so the roots can extend out. I'm not doing the inward routine to reduce root damage. So once it's all loosened up, I may do this once every 2 weeks as my frequency of fertilizing, once every 2 weeks for tomatoes. The volume, the quantity is not that huge. It's small quantity, but do it frequently. So once you have done that, you would give it a gentle watering all around the drip zone. Okay, there. So compost, mulching. What do you see there?
Ants.
Mulch reduces soil temperature. Now, have you measured that soil temperature outside? If you don't water your soil, it's totally dry, and you try to measure it. Last week, we had marine layer until 10 a.m. So sun came out at 10 o'clock. At 1 o'clock, 3 hours of sun exposure, I measure my soil, 150 degrees. Very hot. So ants don't like to be burnt. Just like us, they like to seek shelter. So what better place than a moist, cool, and sheltered place like under the mulch? Perfect, right? So here's what happens. You don't know what's going to come. You may have roly-poly. You may have ants. Now, that's something you need to be careful, because when you layer your citrus trees with mulch, and ants start to move in. Ants are going to farm aphids and scale bugs. They move them and put them onto the tree trunks and also the newly sprouted leaves. And they harvest the excretion, which is really sweet, from the aphids and scale bugs. In the same process, if you have a tree with Huang Long Bing, have you heard of it? All of you? Have you? It's HLB. It's a citrus-borne bacteria that came from China as people smuggle. Initially, they were smuggling pomelo, not knowing that we have the biggest citrus research institution here in California. UC Riverside is the largest institution for citrus development. So they brought in these varieties, may not be better than what we have at UC Riverside. So they bring them in, and they start to spread. So there are areas in Florida that are complete wipeout by now. And it's getting progressively worse in Southern California. So if you have such trees and you notice something funny is turning yellow and the fruits are not developing fully and it's turning green and fall off, you need to call the is it USDA, Jay? It's agriculture.
No. 农业部是
It's a county agency. Anyway, I'll find it out for you.
USDA.
No, it's So if you layer mulch under your tree, be sure to periodically check. If you have ants, you need to destroy their nest somehow. I don't use any kind of chemical pesticide, so you may want to look up solutions. That area that I'm just not familiar with.
What did you do with yours?
This is not citrus, so it's okay. This is squash.
But why didn't you get rid of the ants?
Guess what? I watered it deeply, and they moved.
So to mulch or not to mulch?
Right. You have to decide. Now, ants are so busy. Look at those. Those are scale bugs. I have 80 trees, unfortunately. I have about 25 citrus trees in my backyard. And the infection is limited to just this one. So it's still early, and we had marine layer last week and the week before. The best time to apply neem oil or any kind of solution, organic solution, is early in the morning when there's no sun, because it could be harmful to your leaves when it's super hot. When it's 100 degrees or even 80 plus, you wouldn't do it because it's going to cause problems. The best time to apply is early morning, 5, 6 in the morning. So they get, at that time, the leaves could be a little dewy, a little wet, damp. So you apply the neem oil, dilute it to the right concentration, and you spray the entire tree. Spray a couple times, and the aphids would just dry up and die, and the ants would wonder what happened. Go ahead.
Neem oil is bloody expensive. Is regular mineral, like dormant oil or horticultural oil, do the same thing?
Some people have tried soap, dish soap. I don't know what the concentration is, but it's definitely not any stronger. No, it's a lot weaker than your typical dishwashing solution. So I would say maybe 10 drops in half gallon or something like that. That should be safe. And they would add vinegar to it, and I've heard it's pretty effective. And some oil is designed to make the solution stick on the leaves.